Disclaimer, there's some spoiler alerts from, well, basically ReZero's Arc 1 to Arc 4, and from the anime Season 1 and Season 2. To talk about this topic of all things, I have to mention that for the first minute, we can't really use that word, but considering it's part of the anime, screw it. Return by Death. One of Subaru's abilities that he was given by Satella, of all people, because she's crazy in love with Natsuki Subaru for some reason. And honestly, this ability is pretty OP or pretty cursed, depending on who you ask. For the most part, I guess the question would be, is this a blessing or is this a curse? You could say both, but I feel like to answer both, you still have to go with what is the blessing one would see and what is the curse that one would generally see. So, further ado, let's talk about Natsuki Subaru's Return by Death. So, for this case, we should probably go over the curse side of things, because, most people want to know when something's kind of cursed. So, starting things off, at first glance, Subaru's Return by Death seems like a very handy power. You go back in time in case something goes horribly, horribly wrong. However, the cursed part is you have to unalive in order to trigger that. At least for this case, of course. So, here's the thing with this. It's almost like a video game mechanic. You go, you lose all your health, you respawn, and you come back. However, in the words of Homer Simpson, of all people, from the Simpsons game,
all I can do is die and die and die and die. Each death more painful than the last.
Yeah, dying sucks. Especially how the way Subaru has died. A lot of them are very, very fucking brutal, if not downright deplorable. Since most deaths, like the rabbit, that's just asking to want to lose your goddamn mind. Coming back within the second after you died. You still feel all the fucking pain you suffered. About the amount of times he's been disemboweled by Elsa. Or perhaps frozen to death by Puck, being a terrible end. He only had one graceful end, and that was dying in his sleep. Which is probably the only way he could go out without it being, suffering. So, yeah, there's a lot of psychological issues one must go over whenever having this power. You are going to be a bit cuckoo in the head, especially with the amount of ways one could die. Not to mention that every time you reset, depending on how far, will depend on whether or not you have to restart your relationships. Since you would only have the memories of that loop that you were in before everything was reset. So, basically meaning that, say you met someone that loop, and now you gotta re-meet that person. The way you act and with the information you have may change the way they might look at you, which could be a positive or negative depending on the situation. However, that means that you're going to be alone in the grand scheme of things, because every time you die means that all that information, all those memories, gone. And even then, you don't know when you're coming back to watch which point of the loop. Could be 15 minutes, could be a whole day, a whole week, who knows? It's so random that you just got to make everything count at that point. And even then, you would probably suffer a lot of mental trauma, and no one would really know why, since there's also another factor. You cannot talk about this to anyone. May have been an exception with Echidna, but that was due to her little world. But in reality, you would be more alone than you'd ever think. Every curse has a slight blessing to it, and I guess in this case, Return by Death has been a blessing in many respects, since it offers the user, in this case Natsuki Subaru, an opportunity to correct a mistake, learn from his failures, and the chance to create a better outcome. This ability basically gives him the chance to understand the world, understand those around him, probably understand the pain they might be suffering or the fate they might have in store for them, and alter quite literally fate itself. Since each time Subaru returns by death, it allows him to not only predict what bad things could happen, but also be able to help those in a better way. Furthermore, this power is also shows Natsuki Subaru's resilience and determination. Considering the curse part where he does suffer a lot, he is still willing to help everyone despite the suffering and the repeated trials of going through, well, back to the loop to save everyone. It is important to note that this blessing can only work for any other user if they have the mental fortitude and the driving force to wanna change the outcome for those around. Since the blessing could also just be a selfish one, should one just wanted to better themselves rather than help others. Though in the grand scheme of things, it allows a user to go back and rewrite history itself, rewrite destiny, allowing anything to possibly be changed, which could make you one of the biggest players in any field, which would mean that you'd be one of the most craziest opponents to ever have to be dealt with. So, is Return by Death a blessing or a curse if we had to choose between the two rather than saying both, since in all honesty, Return by Death is a double-edged sword. It subjects the user, in this case, of course, Natsuki Subaru, to unimaginable pain and isolation, challenging his sanity and morality, yet it provides him with the unmatched ability to learn, adapt, and ultimately alter reality for the better of everyone. But if we were to have to guess, if you cannot overcome that pain, the loneliness, and the amount of trauma you're gonna go through, then yes, it would be most likely a curse. For most selfish people who would try to avoid dying at all costs, even with this ability, maybe it's a blessing. Maybe it gives a person a chance to redo things. However, in this case, Subaru has inherited what is essentially a double-edged sword, a blessing and a curse. So honestly, I can't help but think this is one of the crazy aspects of Natsuki Subaru, since it shows his crazy ass determination to want to save everyone else, as well as how he goes through a lot of trauma. I gotta give it that. Though, I kind of wanted to talk about Return by Death as itself, since Natsuki Subaru uses it, but I mean, that ability is not exactly fun. I mean, we play video games, we always respawn when we lose all our health, or, well, yeah, when our character dies and all this and that. However, having that be in a real life setting wouldn't necessarily be fun, especially the dying part. But overall, yeah, Return by Death, kind of a little more curse than blessing, but it will depend on what the user uses it. In Subaru's case, as I said, it's a double-edged sword.